go.
And it's
Okay.
recording, right? Yeah.
We're going to call the meeting to order. This is the monthly meeting of the Dorado Hills Community Council. We're holding our meeting a little early. Normally this would have been the first Tuesday in November, first Monday in November rather, but it turns out the first Tuesday is election day, and so we couldn't access the facility, so we moved it forward. So welcome this evening. And we're always going to start by having our leadership roll call from the standpoint of being responsibilities and also then recognize our district commissioners and committee members. So let's start with Sophia this evening.
Whoa, yeah.
Hi, I'm Sophia Suyamoto. I'm a senior at Oak Ridge High School, and I'm the co-chair of the El Dorado County Youth Commission, and I also sit on the El Dorado County Behavioral Health Commission.
John Heidel, District 1 Supervisor for another 2 months roughly.
I'm Cindy Munn. I'm Supervisor Heidel's assistant, and I do the community information and outreach for the council.
I'm Michael Langthal, Deputy Fire Chief, working at OES, but I chair the fire report that comes out of the Safe and Healthy Communities group now.
And John Davey, can we bring John up as a panelist?
He is a panelist.
Just so he can introduce himself.
See if he, can you unmute John? He's at the airport.
Okay, so maybe he can't.
Okay.
Anyway, he's participating via Zoom, so we'll track our activities here this evening. So we welcome him. Kathy Guerrero was not able to attend this evening, and David Spauer I haven't heard from, so I'm not sure what his status is. So with that, we'll then move on to recognizing any district commissioners and/or committee members who are present. So let's see, spanning the audience. I don't see Tita either, right?
They're both
Yeah.
at the senior.
So Bob, would you please recognize yourself?
Bob Williams, District 2 Planning Commissioner.
Thank you. Okay, and we don't have Supervisor Turnbull on, do we? I didn't
Not
see
yet.
him in the participant
And Mark
screen.
said he was, get the Zoom link to him. Let's see.
Okay. And I'm not seeing any hands raised by anyone that we'd want to recognize in that regard in terms of being a committee or commissioner. So we'll go ahead and move on to item 2 very quickly. This is the adoption of the regular meeting agenda. Does anyone on the leadership team have any proposed changes? Seeing none, we'll accept the agenda as submitted. Item 3, public comment. So this is the opportunity we give anyone here present or on Zoom who would like to raise a question, make a comment, not on tonight's agenda. So we don't want to jump into things like incorporation and LAFCo and all that stuff quite yet. But anything that's not on the agenda for this evening, if we have any comments, please, we just ask you that you have one of the speaker microphones handy, because otherwise our Zoom participants cannot hear you. That's what this is for. You're not going to hear an amplification in the room, but it's for the Zoom connectivity. So does anyone have any comments of items not on tonight's agenda? Seeing none and seeing none online, we'll move right on to item 4. And it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker this evening, Shiva Frentzen. She's our executive officer of the El Dorado County Local Agency Formation, i.e. LAFCo, for those of you who are familiar with that term. And she's going to share with us an updated presentation of the incorporation process as LAFCo's view, which is also consistent with the state OPR reviews of things. And there's also a Cal LAFCo that provides guidance on things. So big organizational, but I do want to point out the fact that the El Dorado County LAFCo and county government are separate entities. There are 2 members of the Board of Supervisors who are represented on the LAFCo commission, but the activities are separate. So everybody needs to recognize for every county, all 58 counties in the state, there is a separate local agency formation commission that operates somewhat independently, but is connected still in some way, typically to the Board of Supervisors. So with that, Shiva, any introductory comments you want to make about your background and stuff?
Good evening. Thank you for having me here today. And I joined El Dorado LAFCo about 2 years ago, October 3rd, and as their executive officer. And it's been my pleasure to serve for a board of 7 voting members and 4 alternates, my commissioners. And as John mentioned, the makeup of the commission are 2 board of supervisors, the cities, Placerville and South Lake Tahoe, and then 2 special district members and 1 public member, and they each have an alternate. So
We should acknowledge that Tim White is on the
and
LAFCo
Tim
commission.
White, that's why I said I have great commission. I'm just
Yeah.
Tim White, I am blessed to have my commissioners, and I'm not kidding. Tim White is a special district. He served on the fire board, the Dorado Hills Fire Board, and he has served on our commission for like 3 or 4 years now. Okay, so if you have any questions about LAFCo, I would be happy to answer that. But tonight, I want to concentrate on the presentation for the incorporation. I did this presentation for our commission a few months ago, and at that point, we assumed there was a talk that the Dorado Hills CSD is going to do a resolution, and they're going to come to us through that venue. But since then, there is a talk about petition and collecting signatures. So I have updated the presentation to touch on that because that's a very important step as well. So Cindy, if you don't mind, I'm just going to do this. And
Oh, okay.
imagine
Did I do it too early?
So this is the overall process. If you can read this, it means you're under 30 years old, and I don't see anyone being able. You have no problem reading it. That's great.
Absolutely, I see every day.
So this is just the overall incorporation process, and we're just going to delve into each color, I would say, and section in more detail, and that's a lot easier to read. So the pre-LAFCo application, I cannot emphasize enough on this step that start with LAFCO and the county and the talks with other agencies as soon as you know that you're going to have the incorporation process. I know that about over a year ago, we met with some citizens who were interested to get the process going through the Dorado Hills CSD, and we had a lot of good talks. They did the initial preliminary financial analysis, and they had a lot of good information, and we talked and went over a lot of details. Since then, there's a new group that I have had the pleasure of meeting a couple, 3 times, and we are in contact, and they reach out to LAFCo, and we go through the process and their timelines and everything. So that's a very important step that I want to kind of emphasize on, and it seems like the initiative and people who are involved and the volunteers are aware of that and following that. At that point, we just kind of define what is LAFCo's role, what are the proponents' roles, alternatives to incorporation. Incorporation cannot be done just for the monetary purposes, because the city is going to get more money. There's got to be some benefit to the residents. And the preliminary fiscal analysis from a couple of years ago that I mentioned, and at that point, you're going to identify up to 3 people to communicate, direct communication with LAFCo. And the initiation can be done by signature from 25% of the voters, 25% of the landowners, or the affected agency's resolution. So resolution is pretty straightforward. If the Dorado Hills CSD wanted to be the lead for this effort, their 5 board members would have put together a resolution to show their intention that they want to pursue the cityhood. The next slide is going to talk about the petition requirements if you do signature gathering. So registered voters, as I mentioned, you need 25% of those signatures, or if you go the landowners route, 25% of those signatures. And then we go to the next slide. For the timing of the petition, first you need to give LAFCo a notice of intent for gathering signatures. From the first date of the, and there are some forms and I have some links at the end, and there are a lot of resources that is not in this presentation, but later on you can just kind of refer to it and use it. So from the date of the first signature, you have 180 days, 6 months, to gather all the signatures. And the petitions and signatures need to be submitted to LAFCo within 60 days of the last signature. At that point, LAFCo is going to contact the register of the voters, and well, first we look at it, make sure kind of it all looks good, and kind of look at the first review, and then we contact the register of voters. Those are the guys that would go through every signature, and basically, like when you vote, they verify that these are all good signatures and you have enough. So if there are enough signatures, we let you know that we certify it, and then if they're not, you have another 15 days to gather more signatures, and then we have like 10 days to turn around. Hopefully the first pass you're going to have enough signatures. So there's a process for that. Next slide. The LAFCo application, whether it's the petition or resolution of initiation of the incorporation, you need to have a description of incorporation proposal, which kind of tells us what are the reasons for incorporation, any concerns, any changes to the effective services, any new services, and information about the geographical and economical data. And then you're going to have some maps and boundaries. Hopefully you're going to have more than one boundary idea in mind. So the sphere that you pick and the boundaries that you pick for the incorporated city, it's always good to have an alternate and not just have one. Because when you do your studies, then at that point they can evaluate everything. Later on, when this all comes to the board and it goes through the negotiation and all that, it's good to have a plan B as well. Plan B and C, possibly. And then the map and description needs to be approved by the county surveyor. And then for the application forms, disclosure of gifts, those are all forms. And then project information, reimbursement agreement, there is an indemnification there that needs to be signed, and then the deposit that goes to LAFCo towards the cost. And then for the full application requirement, the comprehensive fiscal analysis that basically LAFCo hires a consultant to do the study, because at that point we become the agency who is in charge of all this effort for the incorporation, and we have to make sure that they're all independent, neutral parties doing the work. So we send letters for information to all agencies and counties for the fiscal year information, and then there would be public hearings. There are cases that the state controller's office reviews the application. Those circumstances have not happened in the past, but it's just mentioned there that there is a possibility. And the CFA should address the revenue neutrality, the fiscal impact of the proposed change of services. It has to establish the base year cost, and then the property tax transfer, and then the projections for the next 10 years. So that's a pretty involved study to go that far. And then the revenue neutrality, the county auditors determines the the tax flips,
Yeah,
the property tax ratio. And then, the proponents and LAFCo meets with the county to negotiate. And then it's, there are several ways that you can get to that tax, the revenue neutrality. One is the tax sharing agreement. One way is the lump sum, lump sum upfront, or a fixed amount over a period of time. Like the plan B or C, you modify the boundaries. So the impact at that point, when you look at the finances, you know, it makes sense for the two entities to have that revenue neutrality and agreement. And then any other terms that may apply. Revenues and expenditures, and that's why that word is underlined, must be substantially equal for LAFCo to approve. So revenues and expenditures. So you can't have a structural deficit like some of the agencies that we see around that they operate with structural deficits. And I'm not gonna name any names. Revenue neutrality agreement is finalized, and then all parties must agree. So the next slide is going to talk about the LAFCo review. It's the incorporation is subject to LAFCo, the California Environmental Quality Act, and it requires environmental review. That is also prepared by LAFCo consultant, and it needs the initial study for environmental impact report, and then the public hearings. Here I want to kind of expand on this a little bit. The last incorporation that has happened has been a mountain, what is it?
Mountain House.
Mountain House. Yes, and they did, so when they formed with the purpose of becoming a city later on. And that's why they could get away with a NEGDEC, the bare minimum study to do the incorporation. And a lot of attorneys or consultants that you talk to, if you say, well, can the same thing apply to Dorado Hills? They're going to say, you know, these days litigation is out there, and John knows from the Board of Supervisors, I know that a lot of projects that we approved, they got litigated, and then at that point, LAFCo becomes, you know, a must to have. So just wanted to plant that in case you hear rumors about other cities that have formed, what is the difference and why they could get away with that. So the next slide is going to talk about the service plan. This one can be done by the proponents or LAFCo's consultant, because this one is going to talk about the services that are currently provided. Are they going to provide additional services? Where the funding is going to come from? Are the services not going to change? And then any structures or improvement that may be needed, and where the funding for that is going to come from. And then how these services are going to be financed, as it can be paid for. And then the next slide is not going, so if we had the resolution from Dorado Hills CSD, we have to do a targeted MSR for them. I don't know how old their MSR is, probably 3 years old, maybe four. And then possibly doing targeted MSR for Rolling Hills CSD and Marble Mountain homeowners CSD. You know, now that I'm doing this, one thing that would have been very helpful with this presentation is a map of Dorado Hills and where the CSPs are and the fire district and the boundaries. But again, we don't know what the boundaries of the city would be, so just FYI, you can get all that information on our website, going to different MSR, municipal services reviews, and get that information.
Oh, LAFCo.
On LAFCo.us.
Okay, thank you.
And then at the end of the presentation, you can see some links, and it is available. I emailed it. So and actually, LAFCo.us, if you go there, you can get all this information, plus on the resources pull-down menu, you can have access to this presentation. So the rest of this is really the process and the timeline for the hearings and notices and all that. But I am not going to go too much into this, but the hearing needs to be done within 90 days. And then we always post our hearings in the paper and notices that go off and all that. So that is pretty much the same for all LAFCo hearings. And then any hearing, any decision that the commission makes about a project annexation, dissolution, reorganization, there is a 30-day reconsideration period there as well. So this is going to just follow right on. And then the election is pretty much like the other elections. LAFCo informs the Board of Supervisors in election, county calls for an election, the incorporation, Cindy, do you mind?
Just the next slide. Yeah.
The incorporation can be placed on the next general election. If they decide to not do that, the proponents need to pay for the special election. So it's in their best interest to align it with a general election. And then LAFCo prepares the impartial analysis for the ballot. And then this part of it is the same. The county election certifies the result. Board of Supervisors adopts a resolution. It takes majority voter approval for incorporation to happen. And if you don't get the majority approval and it fails, there's a 2-year that you can't come back to LAFCo with an application. And then at that point, LAFCo records the certificate of completion with effective date of incorporation. And post incorporation, there needs to be, the county needs to provide the services for 1 year, and there needs to be a bridge financing to pay for all of this and the cash flow. I hate to highlight this last one because I love to have the boundaries defined in the very beginning. And if you don't define the SOI and wait till the end, as a LAFCo executive officer, per law you can do that, but I prefer to have all of that defined in the beginning when the application is in. So the next slide is really the timeline, how long it takes in each process. This is right out of the OPR manual. And then the last slide are the resources that I mentioned that an OPR is guidelines are one of, even though they're from like early 2000s, they're one of the best documents out there for the incorporation. Ready for answers?
Okay, so leadership team, do we have any questions from anyone on the leadership team relative to the process? We're going to talk a little bit about what's actually gotten started, but the focus tonight is the process.
I just had one quick question for you on the revenue neutrality negotiations. It says the county auditor determines the property tax ratio. Is the auditor the yes or no? Is that the decision maker on how that is going to be split up, or is it somebody else?
So he does his piece, and then everybody gets together and they all need to agree. And it needs to make sense. So say that initial piece is really important, but not the final. But you know how politics work.
Okay, anyone in the conference room here tonight that would like to pose a question? Yeah, Robert.
I was so glad to hear you zero in on the issue of boundaries. As a planning commissioner, next year we have just a lot of work ahead of ourselves with a minimum of 6, as many as 8 specific plans that are going to be overlapping and dealing in your formal district, quite frankly, where all this impact is going to happen. And some of these specific plans are within the sphere of influence for what is currently CSD. Some of them are not. And obviously, as a planning commissioner, we need to look at each one of these things discreetly, but we have to logically in the back of our head say, what is the impact of an approval or denial of an application without understanding the interplay and what that might do in terms of the initiative that might be taking place in whatever form for a new cityhood proposition. Any thoughts about how planning commission get a better sense of and directions from LAFCo in terms of what is and what is not possible in terms of spheres of influence and where that might go?
So, I'll put my multiple hats on, and I tell you, as the planning commissioner, you just need to look at the project and look at the impact.
Right.
And look at which district and which boundaries you need to expand and which area you need to annex to. This is on the side. This may go through, this may get the number of registered voters, it may pass, it may not. So I think it's wise as a planning commissioner to just concentrate on the key proposal that's in front of you and figure out what you need to do at the current state. The proponents need to talk about this and say, in the next 3 years, all these things are coming down. How do we want to set up our boundaries and sphere of influence such that possibly catch these? If they don't go through and go to the other one, what's going to happen if our boundary is there? There are a lot of unknowns and a lot that needs to be done with the incorporation to decide those boundaries.
Annexation then, if it goes through, the boundaries are set at any XYZ street initially. I assume that in the standard annexation processes would go in, or would LAFCo then need to approve those annexations and then go to the supervisors for approval, or?
Okay, so
Yeah.
let's talk about the planning commission and projects that are in front of us.
Right.
Because we're mixing two different things.
Oh, and I understand that, and I did that purposely, so thank you. Yeah, sorry.
So the projects that are coming to you, let's talk about what they are. It's Marble Valley, it's already in the sphere of Dorado Hills.
Yes.
It just needs to be annexed. LAFCo is going to get involved.
Right.
Then you have
Lime Rock is not.
Lime Rock,
Yeah.
the studies,
Yeah.
based on everything that I know that have been done, and the fact that, from what I've heard, the property owner wants to be part of Dorado Hills CSD. It means the sphere of Dorado Hills, and Dorado Hills CSD is, their sphere is contiguous to that. It's next to it. So expand the sphere and annex. If they want to do it with Cameron Park, there is the Cameron State CSD in the middle, and then, which is okay, but it can be justified, and they expand their sphere and annex into that. So these are your two projects where LAFCo comes in. These are going to take years. So in the middle of that, you have this other thing going on here. And if your boundaries are not right and there is a clash, then you are, if your sphere has that, then we have to undo. There's a lot of
It's complex.
details that needs to be hashed out. That's why it's so important to have that initial boundary map and just kind of some plans that are going to help you with projects like that.
Mhm.
And also are going to help you with revenue neutrality negotiations.
Let me add that LAFCo regular reviews, municipal services provided to each jurisdiction, whether it's a community services district, whether it's a city, et cetera. And those, at the same time, review the sphere of influence, the SOI. So that's an ongoing thing. And I think that any entity can actually make a request to LAFCO to update the MSR after some period of previous review. But that's all the LAFCO process that's ongoing in terms of making sure that the local agencies are fiscally solvent. That's one of the things they have to look at. And then is it consistent with what their vision is for the future? Do the spheres need to be considered in terms of future annexations or not? So that'll all get adjusted over time. So whatever ends up being put on the ballot for incorporation is the starting point. It's not the final point. That always can be updated and changed. But what Shiva's telling us is she would like as much definition as she can get up front, because it just makes the whole discussion easier. So.
Yes, absolutely. And that sphere of influence, I know that in the past, they have come to LAFCO and we have said, okay, we need to expand your sphere. But that gives an okay to annexation later on. And to me, that's a passive aggressive way of doing things.
Yeah.
So we have changed that a little bit as well to make it more transparent and not allow the agencies to take advantage and take shortcuts for future annexations and sphere changes. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Back there, you and then. Yes. There is no mic. Oh, there is mic.
Yep.
I
From the
think you
portables.
mentioned that the El Dorado Hills CSD has been talking to you. So my question is, has the El Dorado Hills CSD board discussed and presented this publicly, their intentions and discussions they've had in the past?
The El Dorado Hills CSD board has not talked to me. I met with, wish I had my timeline, maybe about a year ago, met with the proponents back then to do that the El Dorado Hills CSD do a resolution and then they come to LAFCO. So these were volunteers and represent citizens that I met with. I have not met with their board.
Well, but they did complete a funded preliminary fiscal analysis, and that's a matter of record. And
That's true.
we look at that as somewhat similar to an initial study from that perspective, right? The initial study is more the CEQA aspect of it, but there's documents that kind of set. So there is some pre-work, I'll call it, that's been done. And I think that part of it is consistent. We'll talk a little bit about more where we are today as we get, past Shiva's presentation, but
Does El Dorado Hills CSD board notify the homeowners that they were doing this work?
I don't know if they knew that they're doing this work.
So
I
if
don't
you
know.
go on the CSD website, I just looked it up right now, you can see a timeline and all the activities the CSD's been involved with this topic. And it has a timeline going back to 2020 all the way through with links to all the reports. And I think we may have somebody that knows the answer raising his hand right now.
yes. So
Being a
Hey.
person sitting on the El Dorado Hills Community Service District Board, I can just tell you kind of what happened, because I was watching most of it. But they did pass and get the preliminary feasibility analysis in August of 2020. And then they allowed us to see it in October. We were the committee coming in to ask them to do that. They showed it to us in October, and then it kind of went dormant, and they left it dormant. And so after I got in there, it's still been dormant. So we have to kind of resurrect what was started already. As a, for instance, I have some questions here I'd like to ask. I don't know if that answers your question, but I'll be around a little bit afterwards. Kind of banner. But in any case, one of the things I get really nervous about is when we say, well, we got to talk to the auditor controller to get this thing done. And I'm going, what are the ordinances or the laws that apply to how he can deal with us, or how whoever that person is at the time can deal with us, and us being the proponents for cityhood? Are there ordinances that control what he can do, or are there none that it's just, we get to wing it? Do you have any idea?
Don't know the answer to that question. I don't know the answer to that question. That's the auditor. I know that they have some government codes and ordinances that they go by, but I don't know what those details are. And hopefully you would have a very good attorney, whoever are the proponents.
Sure.
They would have a very good attorney that knows all these details.
So for instance, one of the issues that the committee is probably dealing with at this point, and Sue Nelson is here, she's the one who runs that group, so forgive me for jumping in here, but the possibility that Costco will open its doors one day in El Dorado Hills. And we've heard that from the time the permit is issued, that's when the revenue neutrality happens. Then we heard, well, no, it's the time they open their doors to do business. There's various kinds of and what I'm looking at is saying, I want to see the law that says, here's what we can do. And I'm sure Sue Nelson wants to see that also.
I do not know the answer to that
Okay.
question. Sorry.
The original boundaries that were created for Berkston, or whatever their name was, that did our preliminary feasibility analysis, did not include the business park. They showed it as part of the sphere of influence. When myself and another member of the then board of the Cityhood group went to the CSD and said, here's the boundaries you want, we included the business park, and then they took them out. We got surprised, you're not getting the business park. So we're going to be redrawing those. Is there any problem with that having been one way at one point, now another way at another point?
You have no application with LAFCo.
Okay. And the CEQA cost, I'm working with a group called California Unincorporated. We have probably 15 different unincorporated areas in the state of California. This is probably the wealthiest one in the state that they're dealing with. The rest of them are, to be quite frank, they're at the best moderate income kinds of communities. And so the CEQA cost, we've heard that it's $250,000 to get a CEQA document to approval. I find that to be difficult to comprehend, and that we're going to use the El Dorado County general plan to be our general plan for the first 3 years, because it's going to take 3 years to create a new general plan. We'll change the name from El Dorado County to El Dorado Hills, the city of El Dorado Hills, but that'll pretty much be it. But for $250,000, that seems pretty stiff. Do you have any comment about that? Any thoughts about it? Is it even true? I mean, am I just throwing numbers out there that mean nothing?
I know at some point Kevin Lowen reached out to me to get some numbers, and I told him these parts he needs to go and investigate to see how much they are, because we don't have an application and I don't have a good feel. But I gave him some numbers from when we did the incorporation back in 2005. I shared some numbers with him and how much the consultants cost and all that. So I don't know, Steve.
So Mr. Lowen is gone now, and I'm not, he's in Mesa, Arizona or somewhere like that. I don't have access to his thing. So would you have copies of that maintained in your records at all?
If you send me an email, I will go. I have
Be
a
happy to.
folder that I put it
Okay,
in,
thank
and
you.
I would be happy to, because that's public record.
One last question, that's about the project down here with UC Davis for seniors and so forth. That
Yes.
may come about over the next 2 years or 20 years, we don't know. And so when we put in the sphere of influence, when Sue and her team puts in this for the sphere of influence, do they need to put that in at that point?
So I can't give you any advice on
Got it.
what your
Okay, yeah,
share
fair
needs
enough.
to be. I have met with the group, and I have shared with them as much as I possibly could. And that is not something that you would get advice from LAFCo.
I can tell you what was done in the past is the corporation team reached out to landowners and immediately adjacent to where the boundaries were and asked them if they wanted to be in or out and the justification for that. And that evolves to the point of a decision, yeah, it makes sense, or no, it doesn't, but there's costs associated with the coverage that's required from CAL FIRE when you convert from being basically a state responsibility area to 100% local responsibility area. So those are considerations in terms of what's the net cost when it's all said and done. And those are discussions that have to happen in the future, but nothing is definitive in terms of this is going to be in, this is going to be out as of yet. But the sphere allows you to define where those boundaries are that in the future you would propose to possibly annex in. So that's all part of that discussion.
For instance, the fire is held by Dorado Hills Fire. It has nothing to do with Cityhood particularly. So that wouldn't really be a Cityhood issue, other than just putting the loop around there to say it's gonna become part of the city. The sphere of influence loop.
We're getting a little bit off base.
I
I'll
got it.
comment on some of this when we
Yeah.
ask Shiva's presentation. I want to answer process questions and make sure we complete those before we move on to the other.
Sorry. I have to jump over there.
Pat, do we have a microphone that Pat can use?
Hi, I'm Pat Kriz. Thank you for coming, Shiva. I have 3 questions. How many places have incorporated in California in the last 5 years? And I didn't understand your explanation of mountain home status. I don't know what the difference is between the CSD level of governance and the city level of governance. So what is mountain home? And what has changed in the last 20 years in the way of state legislation controlling the incorporation process? And could you answer, is there an alternative to the 40-year revenue payback that the county would have been required to pay 20 years ago, or the city would have been required to pay to the county 20 years ago when we voted on this? Actually, it was 2005 that we voted on this.
So the first question, one in the last 5 years,
And who was that?
and that's the mountain house that I explained. So they initially were formed as a special district. So Dorado Hills is a special district, but in their formation documents, there was clearly stated that they are forming this to become a city down the road.
What did they become?
They became a city.
They started out as a CSD.
Right.
What's that?
Community Services District.
Oh, CSD.
CSD, and then they, in their original documents, they said that they wanted to become a city, but this forming a CSD was an easier process to get started. And then they had 4 or 5 years of experience as a CSD as they worked to becoming a city.
So they're now a city?
They're now a city, and that's how they could have, instead of a full CEQA and EIR, they could have a neg deck and become a city down, and they did not get challenged.
So you guys better explain NAEC, because a lot of
Okay.
people might not know.
The negative.
Declaration.
Yes.
So you're saying that no one has actually incorporated directly as a city in the last 5 years?
Which one? The mountain house that I mentioned.
No, they didn't. They went into a CSD governance structure.
But they converted, they became a city.
Right,
So
but
that's
their
what they-
initial effort was not to become a city, it was to become a CSD.
So so 0 or 1, you know the concept. So whether we say 0 because you don't count the mountain house, or 1 because we count them.
I don't count them.
So, okay, don't count them.
Okay,
That's fine.
and
That's
what
not
has,
argument. So, what has changed legislatively in the past 20 years? Nothing. So before this, the part of the vehicle license fees used to go to fund Cityhood. And that stopped, I don't know exactly when it stopped, and that's when the incorporation efforts became just kind of stalled, because they didn't have any additional funding. As you see for the Dorado Hills CSD, even though they have the backing of the Dorado Hills Incorporation, even though they have the backing and funding possibly from Dorado Hills CSD, there's still a lot of cash flow and funding that you need to have in the beginning. to become a city. So it's very difficult financially to justify and become just from being part of unincorporated county to become a city on your own.
I'm well aware of that. And how many years payback time is the city required to reimburse the county for loss of revenue?
So there is no formula for that. That's all happens during the revenue neutrality negotiation. It's from 10 to 20 to 25. If you look at other cities, what they have done with the county, it's all over the place. There is not one formula that says you give the county 20 years or 30 years or 40 years and you're all set, you can go. You can get a lump sum in the beginning, you can just give them a fixed revenue so you have to negotiate that with the county, basically.
Okay.
Yes. I go here and then I go to Steve. Do you want the?
He's got one right there.
We've got one.
Oh, you have one.
Okay.
I do.
Is it green?
Well, it is now.
Okay, then you're good to go, Bill.
Okay. Yes, it is. It is good. Shiva, really good to see you again.
Same here.
Absolutely. And to learn about the county and all of its functions. When I have done over our years of working on the, with the county, with the, what am I looking for? Anyway. Anyway, I'm sorry. I
Senior
just-
programs, is that-
Yeah, right, right, that's it. That's okay. I'm getting younger by the day. Anyway, I just, what I want to thank you for is the illumination and the description of what LAFCo is and what it does. It's very complex, but I think you have, in my opinion, you have explained it very, very well. So my question is, are there LAFCOs in every county in California?
Yes.
Okay.
58 LAFCOs.
58
In
LAFCOs.
state of California.
Okay. So looking back at when South Lake Tahoe formed as a city, it obviously went through the LAFCO process. I'm thinking.
Sorry, what year did they become a city? I think
I don't know.
LAFCOs.
I think it was prior to
became-
Cortese and Oxfordburg,
Yes,
so.
became in existence in early 2000s. So,
Okay.
yes, so back in 1950 something, we had their MSR, I don't remember.
Okay.
It was a long time ago.
Okay. Thank you.
Definitely.
Are there now, do LAFCOs or similar organizations to LAFCO exist in other states? And how does that work? Are you aware?
I don't believe other states have LAFCOs. I have not researched that, but readily, I don't believe they're like the state of California. Okay. Thank you. Definitely. Steve?
The city of Citrus Heights was
Yes.
incorporated a few years ago, and
Yes.
along with,
No, it was incorporated in 2004,
like I said, a few years ago,
20 years ago.
20 years ago.
That's more than a few.
Sorry. It was incorporated along with Rancho Cordova, but the incorporation document, and I spoke to Jeannie Bruin about it, who is the mayor of that town for a long time. But I spoke to her about it, and they had an insufferable revenue neutrality agreement. So because they became a city, they had status, so they sued, and they got it reduced from, I believe it was 5 million a year down to 2 million a year, from forever to 20 years. But Jeannie told me that like 5 or 6 years ago, so I'm just trying to remember it best I
2
can.
years ago.
In any case, the point is, when those things happen, if they're terrible, everybody on both sides of the aisle gonna know that they're going to court to settle it, and they're a lot better off, I think, to get real about what those numbers should be.
And what did their litigation cost?
What were the litigation costs for,
To sue the
Citrus
county of
Heights?
Sacramento?
I have no idea.
Yeah, it's up there. Yeah, you think $250,000 is just steep? Let's talk about litigation. Yeah, and then also Citrus Heights, you also gotta remember that mall played a big role in being able to win that litigation as well.
And Elk Grove and Rancho Cordova citrus tax all incorporated within a period of 2 or 3 years. So they all made it before we attempted it. And they were all successful.
Some got 10 years for the revenue neutrality payment, some got 25, but the actual ballot measure that was in 2005 specified 25 years. I went back and looked at it. It wasn't 40, it's 25 years
For El Dorado.
for El Dorado Hills. So that's a public record as well. But anyway,
There were two other cities that incorporated after 2005. One was called Parupa Valley out of Riverside County, and the other was also in Riverside County, but I can't recall the name. But they started to fail because they didn't have the money coming in from the tax that you're talking about, the automobile registration tax. So the state made an exception and gave those two cities that revenue to keep them solvent.
There was an effort to have that VLF. Actually, every year, I think they keep bringing it out and just fails.
yeah. Any other process questions for Shiva, please? Not seeing any and not seeing any. Thank you very much, Shiva,
Thank
for
you
the
for having me
presentation.
here. Or
Stay and just, yeah, listen for a few minutes and then we move on beyond this subject. Yeah, you're free, obviously to spend your evening as you choose. But I did want to basically say that the current efforts going on are in parallel with what the El Dorado Hills Community Services District looked at before, meaning dissolution of the CSD. So the parks, recreation, the franchise fees for waste collection and for the internet, all of those, and also CC&R enforcement, the way it stands right now, would be responsibilities of the newly incorporated city. All of that has to transfer over or be accommodated some other way through legislative change or whatever, but that's part of the plan. So the incorporation effort then would expect to see the property tax revenues and any sales tax revenue that the CSD receives, and I think sales tax is 0, but I don't know for sure. But certainly property tax revenues would be transferred to the newly incorporated area. The other part of that is the municipal services that the county now provides, such as road maintenance, law enforcement, the other one, big one is animal control. Those services move from a county responsibility to a city responsibility. And part of the discussion of revenue neutrality is how much funds does the county collect for those services that gets moved to the city? And that's the balancing point. Then beyond that, you look at what is the impact of employment and other things. What's the harm done to the county that has to be negotiated through revenue neutrality? So you try to reach a balance in terms of nobody's necessarily happy, but you can get to a point of agreement. And that's the stuff that LAFCo ultimately has to preside over and make final determinations of. So that's the original, that's the approach we're taking right now. It's very similar to what the CSD did with their preliminary financial analysis, and then move on from that. So that's kind of the backdrop behind what's going on, but we are looking at a circulated petition drive for signatures, which was done in 2004 to qualify for the ballot in 2005. There's a number of reasons that I personally think that that's advantageous, because it's an opportunity for the public to ask questions, educate people. What is it? What's in it for me? Why do I want to subject myself to a new form of government? And so that's one of the biggest things. Why add another layer of government? The answer is it's not adding a layer of government. It's dissolving one called the Community Services District, and it's creating one called the new city. So there's trade-offs that go with that. And oftentimes people say this is going to create new taxes. No, it creates no new taxes. The elected officials, i.e. your city council members, will determine whether or not they want to go forward with bond measures or other things, which people consider to be taxes, but it has to be approved by the public. So the city can define fees and fines similar to what the county does, but they can't establish new taxes. So the ballot measure, getting it on the ballot through a petition that's circulated, allows education to happen, it allows questions to be answered, and allows everybody to look at the what's in it for me. Why would I want to support this or not? And a lot of the details don't come out until later in the process, but this is a continuous education process that has to happen. It can't just be, here we are, keep it in the dark, nobody knows about what's going on, and then bring it to the ballot. There's gonna be a lot of public inputs on it, so it has to be that way. So we would anticipate guest speakers in some forum to basically explain, why should we incorporate? You know, why did Rancho Cordova incorporate? Why did Citrus High School incorporate? And 20 years plus after the fact, what were the benefits of it? Was it really successful for them? So that's part of the discussion that will be ensuing and a lot of the exchange of information. I think it's very important to understand that incorporation doesn't go through the Planning Commission. It doesn't go through the Board of Supervisors other than acknowledging to put it on the ballot. But the Board of Supervisors through their LAFCo membership will certainly influence what happens at LAFCo. But again, you have 2 city members, one from South Lake Tahoe, one from Placerville, 2 special district members, and then a member at large that represents the 7 members of the LAFCO commission. And ultimately, working with the executive officer, make the determination of what gets on the ballot, what doesn't. The real advantage I see in this is a lot of this is really prescriptive, and it was defined back in 2005. There's a lot of excellent documentation. The actual ballot measure that was put before the voters is available. I've gone through that, and I think a lot of that, without change, is the same. There are obviously some changes, but it's not like we're starting from scratch. There's an awful lot of pre-work that was done in 2004, 2005, and then with the CSD initiating the preliminary fiscal analysis, that also gives us a leg up in where we're going from the finance perspective. So with that, yeah.
You use the word "we" a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
Who is the
Collective, the community. This has to be a community effort, right?
Okay, thank you.
Yes,
All
yes.
right.
We, the community of El Dorado Hills, right? This is the community council.
Okay,
So that's what I mean by we,
okay,
right?
thank you.
And there will be very active people, and there will be a lot of people that be asked to circulate petitions. Everybody's gonna have something to contribute should they choose to. So that, at least that's the
So
intent.
The community council will be spearheading this effort?
I don't know the actual evolution of the community council once I'm out of office.
Okay.
And so that has to be determined as of yet, but some forum like this will be established to continue the communication. That's my intent at least. And I think that's the committee's desire. So, we'll see how that sorts out. Tim?
One of the things I'm not quite sure that what you said is correct, with CCNR enforcement, cities cannot do CCNR enforcement under California law.
Okay.
And as you know, the CSD does a lot of CCNR enforcement in the various neighborhoods in El Dorado Hills. I think when we did the preliminary fiscal analysis, that issue was addressed, and it was said that we would still have to have a CSD remnant, if you would, whose only responsibility might be CCNR enforcement.
And my approach would be legislative change to get it off the state records, because I think there's only 2 communities, El Dorado Hills and one other community, that got special legislation to establish it. So ultimately, that's something I think needs to be worked in parallel, but that's a whole nother discussion of how we go about that. But
Okay, yeah.
so that's an alternative.
Legislative change, as you know, is difficult.
Yes, they all are. Yes.
You said something that makes, what's in it for me?
Yeah.
And I would say that's only part of the question we need to ask ourselves. Because what's in it for me may not be the same as what's in it for my community.
Yes.
And it's
It
very
has to be
clear that
collective. Yep.
for some people, voting to spend anything is not acceptable, is a non-starter. What's in it for me?
And I think when we're complete the analysis, you can look at the preliminary fiscal analysis, but what it means is local control of services, local control of law enforcement. A lot of different things happen with the transition into a city. And with those become opportunities for further expansion. The other thing to note is when you look at the way the state is structured, particularly with road maintenance costs, cities have a higher standing than unincorporated county areas do relative to the funding that they get. It's all part of a pool of money. But in general, we should expect to see more money coming from the state, Proposition 1 funds and stuff, to do road maintenance than what we're currently getting through the county. So that's some of the advantages we'll get to.
John, my point is, we're all a certain age. A lot of us are a certain age. And we're looking towards the future. This is for the future of El Dorado Hills. It's for the future of your grandkids, your kids. But I'm going to be dead. And before I die, I would prefer not to spend another single cent. So, I mean, no, I'm just simply voicing that in terms of how to look at this. When you say, how should we all have to ask ourselves, how are we going to evaluate this? Because it's just absolutely stunning that here we are, 55,000 people, and we're still totally subject to a board of supervisors. And I can't remember the names of them all.
I can help you with that too, but that's a distraction rather than a value add commentary. So, any other kind of final questions? I don't want to get into a lot of details. A lot of the planning is going to be forthcoming when we get this thing really launched and started, but there's work to be done before that. Yes, Bill.
John, I don't have a question. I just have a little clarification. Because when I was talking to Shiva, I had a little brain thing in terms of our working together. And Shiva, you and I know each other from when I was on the civil grand jury for at least
Yes.
2 to 3 years.
There it is. Yep.
I just wanted to clarify that. That's all. I want, Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. All right, so like I said, more to come on this subject, but thank you again, Shiva, for your patience and your time to come out and share with us the process. That's where everything has to start, understanding the process. And this is a difficult one, and the timeline is critical, and so there's an awful lot of things. And it was mentioned that having legal representation, legal counsel on this, that is essential based upon what I have learned from incorporation processes. And that legal counsel needs to be very active in talking to certain people within the county about their obligations and making sure they understand their obligations relative to the process. Because a lot of the timelines are linked with, we have to have financial data from the auditor controller. And if it doesn't come in on time, it slips over and has to be renewed a year later. Those are the things that can't happen if you're going to have an effective timeline. And so there has to be exchange of information from a legal perspective of what the requirements are. So we'll make sure that all those things happen if this gets appropriately launched. But the start would be a petition drive, as Shiva mentioned, 25% of the registered voters' signatures to get it on the ballot are required. And that has to happen before the formal application of the LAFCo occurs. So it's a precursor, if you will. But
I'd like to make one comment. As been mentioned, I'm a LAFCo commissioner. I'm a LAFCO commissioner for 2 more years.
Yeah.
It's likely that I will be the only representative from El Dorado Hills on LAFCO for the next 2 years. I mean, our new supervisor may go into LAFCO, we don't know. But I think it would be nice if El Dorado Hills Incorporation goes before LAFCO, to have someone from El Dorado Hills on LAFCO to be part of the process and who will be deeply engaged with it and very, very knowledgeable about it, more so than maybe some of the other commissioners from different parts of the county.
I will mention one thing. Right now, the target date is an election on November of 2026. So it's a 2-year approximate time frame, which is consistent with Shiva presented on the OPR records. That's roughly what you're talking about, but it's in a very aggressive petition gathering, signature gathering process on the petition if you're going to accomplish that. So we just need to recognize that's what's ahead if it moves forward as planned. We'll see. TBD. Very good. With that, then let's move on to the rest of our activities. So we'll start with the supervisor communications then. Quick rundown. Costco development team is still in discussions. I don't know when they're going to resubmit, but we did, I'll say, we being part of the planning department at the county and myself went down and Cindy went with us. We visited the Elk Grove Costco, found out a lot about their experiences, the architectural themes, the aesthetics, what they did in terms of landscaping to try to block views from adjacent community, residential communities. And so we learned an awful lot. I think it's going to be helpful in our planning department's discussion with Costco in terms of when it gets to what's the warehouse going to look like, right? Which is aside from all the other things that have to go into that planning process. So more to come on Costco. Town and Country Village. The draft EIR has been updated, but the public hearing dates for the planning commission and the board of supervisors are sometime in 2025, as I understand it.
Yes, Town and Country will appear before, for informational purposes, this Thursday before the planning commission.
For informational purposes, but no decision making.
Right,
Yes, so good point on that. And Bob, you want to give them the time, 8:30 in the morning, isn't that correct?
That's the time we usually start.
Yes, okay. So if you're interested in that, there is a Zoom connection. You don't have to go up to the planning commission chambers, participate in the meeting. There is a Zoom meeting to do that. It's Thursday, 8:30 a.m. is when it starts, and that information is available on the website. Cindy can help you find it if you can't find it. Nothing new on AKT, Community for Health and Independence, which is the project that's been talked about, the 1,400 acres on the Sacramento County side and 1,400 acres on the El Dorado County side. We really expect the El Dorado County side to move forward separate from the Sacramento County side, at least for the time being, but who knows what they're going to propose. Generations at Green Valley, likewise, I don't think any dates have been set for any of that, but they're going to be in 2025. The Business Park District 2 Gateway Project, the parcel split appeal was denied on October 8th based upon specific county code for parcel splits, and a project-specific plan is anticipated from the developer, which will require processing through the Planning Commission, which is when all CEQA-related and other pertinent concerns must be addressed. And as I intended to, I'll present this at APAC again, but I did reach out to County Council as I promised to do, to get a couple pieces of input relative to APAC's letter being submitted and not being included when the zoning administrator held their hearing. What County Council has informed me is the planning staff has confirmed that APAC's letter that was submitted the day prior to the zoning administrator hearing was posted on the Legistar file. So that's a matter of record. And so if APAC believes their last letter was not posted, I'd like to understand that, because staff is telling me it was, but it came in the day before the meeting. If APAC feels that their letters that they sent to the planning well before the item was even placed on the zoning administrator agenda should have been included without further request from APAC, that would be a somewhat unusual thing to do. Though perhaps planning would do so for official agency comments on a project, I do not believe it is typical so for a public comment from a community group like APAC. So the county has specifically identified review committees, advisory committees that are positioned, and they're subject to the Brown Act, and they're subject to Form 700 submittals. A lot of requirements if you're an official county advisory committee. APAC in El Dorado Hills has operated without that status for probably 20 years now, close to that, for various reasons that we'll discuss later. But basically, county council's response was the one letter from APAC was included, and if there was other information that was desired, they should have been requested.
Will that letter be made available?
I need to make sure the county council is okay with releasing this. He gave me verbal, but I need to make sure that exactly the statements that are here we can put in a letter.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
The other aspect was the tolling agreement. And he says, there appears to be some confusion in the community about what the tolling agreement with Wind Ridge Investments does and doesn't do, particularly as it relates to the director's determination concerning fulfillment center, heavy distribution, and parcel hub uses. And I'm allowed to share this with members of the public. And again, I'll get his permission to share a specifically written part of it. Wind Ridge Investments tolling agreement. Following withdrawal of the development application for Project Frontier on June 12, 2023, the Director of Planning and Building issued a director's determination regarding the fulfillment center, heavy distribution, and parcel hubs, i.e. called the determination. On June 23rd, 2023, Wind Ridge Investments, LLC, i.e. WIN, the owner of the R&D zone parcel previously proposed for development as Project Frontier, filed an appeal of the determination. Although WIN filed its appeal of the determination in order to preserve its ability to develop a fulfillment center, heavy distribution facility, or parcel hub on its property, WIN is actively pursuing a different use of its property, residential development, I think as most of us know. To avoid having to challenge the determination through appeal and possible litigation, while concurrently pursuing approval of an unrelated residential project, WIN requested the county execute tolling agreement, which the Board of Supervisors authorized on August 29, 2023. Among other things, while it's in effect, the tolling agreement does the following. Number one, it extends the time period within which Wynn's proposal must be heard by the planning commission. Number two, it stays the running of the statute of limitations on any associated claim or litigation that Wynn may later bring concerning a determination. Number three, it precludes Wynn from submitting a development application for a project that would be considered a fulfillment center, heavy distribution facility, or parcel hub under the determination. And four, it precludes the county from pursuing action to codify the determination. However, the tolling agreement does not otherwise affect the determination, which remains in effect and applicable to any project proposing fulfillment center, heavy distribution, or parcel hub uses within the industrial or R&D zones. So I'll try to get his approval to put that all out, but I wanted to share that, and I'll try to do that before the APAC meeting in November.
And, that's very helpful. It runs contrary to, comments made in public hearing at the planning commission. So I'll be very eager to get those two things aligned.
Okay. Yeah, well, so we just need to make sure we're all factually presenting things, and so that's why I always reach out to county council. They're very organized in making sure all of the information is gathered. So yeah, we'll work on that a little bit. All right, so let's go on then. Interim community objective design standards to be scheduled for the Board of Supervisors agenda in November of 2024. I don't know the exact date, but I know it's not our first meeting in November, so it may be our second meeting in November. The Board of Supervisors approved a tobacco use, including vapes, prevention program first reading of the ordinance with the second reading and adoption scheduled for November 5th, next week's meeting. And the board and that's on consent because basically we've had the first reading. Consent normally is a second reading is normally on consent unless someone requests it be pulled. And then finally, the Board of Supervisors review and provided direction to staff on the major update of the traffic impact fee program with the final resolution presented on December 3rd. So, and there are substantial changes primarily to Zone C, which represents El Dorado Hills. So if you're interested in understanding what the developers are going to have to pay, and even if you're an individual property owner and want to build on your property, what those fees are going to be, but the fees are going up substantially, in particular for residential properties and somewhat for commercial properties. So that information is available. So moving on, is there any other comments or questions on those multitude of items? All right, then we'll get into our leadership team progress reports, and we always start with safe and healthy communities. I'm guessing we don't have a sheriff's report, right? Cindy, we don't have a sheriff's report? Okay, all right. And I don't see CHP representation here tonight. So we'll have our fire report.
We will, very briefly. I'll keep it brief. All right, again, Michael Lilienthal, I'm the Deputy Chief of the El Dorado Hills Fire. I guess probably a couple good updates. One, the fire department just finished an engineer's exam process. It's very lengthy, very involved for us. It's a lot of work from our staff, our leadership, and our members, and they did a great job. We ended up a list of 7 eligible engineers, so firefighters that are eligible to promote to engineer. So that was great. We are looking at the Santa Run December 10th through 13th, so mark your calendars. Routes will be out soon. As a reminder, that's our annual food and toy drive. It's a fun event, but the reason we do it is the food and the toys for the kids. And so just a reminder on that. And lastly, it's even though it doesn't feel like we're ever going to hit winter, it's time to start cleaning out your gutters and drains and getting yourself ready for power outages and things like that. And just a reminder, we'll have sand and sandbags available here at Station 85 if you need it. With that, end of report.
Do you have any forecast on when the outdoor burning might, obviously it's a function of how much it rains and that sort of, but typically it happens about the middle of November, doesn't it? Or is it later?
Once CAL FIRE gets a substantial storm that actually gets things wet and really changes the fuel dynamics, that's usually when they'll open up burning again.
Okay, all right. Very good.
No major storms, a little one maybe.
Yeah, a little one that might get some snow in the higher elevations, all that stuff. So we're waiting for that storm front to come in. So, yep. All right, very good. Healthy communities, Kathy Guerrero was not able to be with us this evening, so we don't have her report, I don't believe, right?
No.
Okay. And moving on, go to Sophia, right?
Awesome. Okay, at Oak Ridge, last month we had homecoming, and that was the most tickets we've ever sold for a dance in the history ever. So it was big success for leadership on a dance that large, and it was very, very successful. And student leadership is currently working on Spirit of Giving Week I believe it'll be the week before Thanksgiving break, and that's usually when we ask for donations and we have spirit days and whatnot to celebrate the spirit of giving. And then our new parking lot is almost complete. Hopefully by the end of the month it'll be done, but it's probably going to take a couple more weeks. But our principal put out a message saying that it's supposed to be done relatively soon. And there is a financial aid information night on November 6th for seniors who are applying for financial aid next year for college. And then on the Youth Commission, we've been invited to attend a few programs, including Breaking Barriers, and we're still deciding on what we're going to attend and what fits best with our commission. And we've also elected our new officers, including myself.
Nice.
And we are looking to fund a program to train our peer advocates across the county through a grant we received last year. And then finally, we are shadowing the Board of Supervisors next month, I think in about 2 weeks or so.
Okay, excellent. And that's always a fun process. If you've never watched that, the Youth Commission shadowing the board, they come and sit on the dais with us. And we go through and review certain things on the agenda and ask for some comment. But it's a chance for them to understand what local government's about at the level of supervisors. So it's a great event. I will mention when I drove down Silver Valley Parkway, what I noticed was that the opening into Oak Ridge on the upper part of it, with a new entrance, seemed to be open. So at least part of it's open to get down to the parking structure. So they've been able to accomplish some of that was blocked off for several months. So it's starting to happen gradually. But I think we all look forward to have a fully functional high school campus again, and tied with the new stoplights that's out there, which I think is controlling the traffic quite a bit better now than it was before, particularly pedestrian traffic, but allowing the cars to get through. So I think some huge improvements and a much safer environment is the way I look at it. So kudos to everybody that was involved with that. So I think, Cindy, let's go to your report and then I'll kind of wrap up the rest of it.
Okay, October 31st, it's coming up quick. We have the Halloween Spooktacular. It's from 3 to 6 p.m. at the Dorado Hills Town Center businesses. They're going to have trick-or-treating from 3 until 6, and then they'll have a costume contest starting at 5. They're going to have different categories of the contests for the costumes. Cutest, scariest, hero, villain, most creative, best family or group. And also on October 31st, there's going to be a senior Halloween party at 1 p.m. at the Gilmore Senior Centers. Costumes are encouraged and entertainment and snacks are provided. November 8th, there'll be a Veterans Day celebration at 10:30 at the Gilmore Senior Center. They're going to celebrate veterans and honor the veterans with a flag raising ceremony, and the light refreshments will be served. On November 17th, there'll be a yoga in the park at 9 a.m. at the Oak Knoll Park. It's a family-friendly introduction to yoga postures and flows, and it's a free event brought through a partnership with Yoga 6. November 22nd is a Friendsgiving potluck at 1 p.m. It's at the Gilmore Senior Center. The event is free, but they are requiring pre-registration at the center because the space is limited. Starting on November 29th through December 24th, Elf on the Boulevard scavenger hunt. That's in Dorado Hills Town Center. You get a little card and you find the elf and you search all the different participating businesses and you can mark off that you saw the elf, and then you submit your cards for possible prizes. And then finally, November 30th is going to be Small Business Saturday, and that's all day at Dorado Hills Town Center businesses. All the participating businesses will be giving special discounts and fun stuff going on in the town center.
Very good. All right,
That's
so Tim, APAC's report.
The next APAC meeting is on Wednesday, November 13th at 6:30 right here. As usual, will be both Zoom and in person. Our guest speaker is going to be Scott Hudson, who is from PAC Trust, and he will be presenting on the Gateway El Dorado Specific Plan pre-app. And it's a proposal, specific plan to amend the current R&D land use and zoning on approximately 67 acres of the 98 acres to include commercial, multifamily, residential, park, and open space uses. So that's probably going to be the major topic for that night. Other issues will include updates on existing projects and anything that happens at either the Planning Commission or the Board of Supervisors, we will update. And finally, the most exciting thing will be the 2025 officer APAC election. And I think we're going to have the same slate of officers unless we get someone else from the community to volunteer and take one of our places. End of report.
All right, thank you, appreciate that. Let's move on to thriving economy. The new 7-member Strategic Economic Enhancement Development, that's what SEED stands for. Were appointed by the Board of Supervisors at our October 15th meeting in Tahoe. David Spauer is officially on the committee. He is our representative, and I think they're going to find that that group of people is very, very broadly talented and experienced in things that affect economic development. So we're looking forward to some exciting things starting to happen through the county's planning process using those that advisory group. Public infrastructure, workforce excellence, strategic innovation, nothing new to report there. And Supervisor Turnbow, I didn't make the meeting tonight. And Bob, I don't know if you had anything from District 2. I've not heard anything, but would you like to add anything? No?
No, thank you.
Okay, all right, very good. So with that, we'll move on quickly to the other council member items. Our next meeting is Monday, December the 2nd, 2024 here at 5 p.m. Election date coming up next Tuesday, right? So November 5th, please vote. Everybody should voice their opinions on the candidates and the ballot measures and everything else. So I know I've already voted. I think a lot of us have already voted, but it's an important function, particularly if you're 18 or over, right?
I'm not.
You're one of the younger students, yeah, at this point. Okay, I understand. So anyway, please vote. And then the next month guest speaker is TBD. We'll figure that one out between now and probably the middle of November here. Since this meeting is early, just haven't had enough time to really contemplate how we want to close out the year, so to speak. So we'll get that done. So with that, any go backs by anybody? All right, we're adjourned. We didn't do too bad, right? 6:24. Thank you.